There are secrets you believe will be buried forever, secrets you convince yourself will dissolve with time. But one day, without warning, they come back. They rise like a storm breaking the horizon. And when they do, they don't just haunt you. They destroy everything you thought was safe. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am the eldest daughter of Edward Whitmore, the man everyone in our town once called a visionary. To the world, he was a success story, the founder of a company that grew from a small storefront into an empire. People admired him. They praised his discipline, his charm, his unstoppable drive. At home, he carried the same weight, but what the world never saw was how heavy that weight really was. My mother should have been the balance in our house, the softer voice that steadied his, but she died when we were still young. Her absence left a silence no one could fill, and in that silence, my father's voice became the only law. Sometimes I try to remember her laugh or the way she smelled of lavender, but memories fade, and what remains is the emptiness she left behind. I was always the quiet one, the one who smoothed the edges, who kept the peace, who looked down at her hands whenever voices rose. My sister Julia was different, sharp, cutting, never afraid to say what I only dared to think. And then there was Sophie, the youngest, the one our father loved to parade in front of people. Brilliant. A lawyer? Beautiful. Confident. She was his pride, his proof that he had done everything right. For years, people looked at us and saw a perfect family, the house in the suburbs, the expensive cars, the company logo shining on billboards across the city. But what they didn't know, what I didn't let myself admit, was that behind those photographs, the cracks were already there. I remember the night it began to unravel. It was my father's 70th birthday. The ballroom shimmered with balloons in gold and silver. Champagne glasses caught the light. Music drifted from a hired quartet in the corner. Partners, clients, old friends of the company, all of them there to honor Edward Whitmore. Cameras flashed as he walked in, his suit pressed, his smile polished, his arm raised in that practiced wave. I stood in the crowd with my sisters at my side. Julia leaned close, whispering something sarcastic. It almost made me laugh, though my stomach was already tight. Sophie stood tall. She glowed with that effortless confidence that made people turn their heads. We were three women bound by blood and by silence, standing in the orbit of the same man. Then the moment came. My father took the microphone. His voice boomed steady, commanding, filling every corner of the room. He spoke of legacy, of family, of the importance of building something that lasts. People nodded, raised their glasses, as if each word were prophecy. And then with a sweep of his hand, he made his announcement. He said he would divide the company among his 3 daughters. Each of us would receive a share. The crowd broke into applause thunder, rolling through the chandeliers. But then, just as quickly, his tone shifted. He said he would keep one thing, the right to overrule, the right to decide, the right to make the final call. People kept clapping, but I felt the air tighten around my chest, because I knew he had never let go of anything in his life. Not control, not power, not us. Julia's jaw clenched. She said nothing. And then, from the quiet, Sophie spoke. Her voice was steady, sharper than I had ever heard it. She asked about legal documents, about clarity, about what it meant to hand something over while still gripping it with both hands. She wasn't disrespectful, just precise, like the lawyer she was. The room fell silent. Even the music seemed to stop. My father stared at her, his smile frozen, his eyes narrowing. And then he said it, a single sentence, cutting through the air like glass breaking. If you cannot trust me, then you will have nothing. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then someone laughed nervously. Another lifted their glass higher. The orchestra picked up the tune again, as though nothing had happened. The crowd wanted to move on, to keep the celebration alive. But I stood there, my ears ringing, watching Sophie's face pale as she turned away. That was the moment I felt it, the hairline crack turning into a fracture, the beginning of something none of us could stop. I looked at my father at the way he raised his glass again, grinning for the cameras, basking in the applause. And I thought, this is not generosity. This is a test. And the punishment for failing is exile. The rest of the night blurred. People danced, they laughed, they clinked glasses. But inside me, there was only the sound of something breaking. I knew then, even if no one else could see it, that a storm was gathering over us. Not the kind you watch from the safety of a window, but the kind that tears the roof from the house and leaves you standing in the ruins. And as I stood in that ballroom, smiling for the sake of appearances, I whispered to myself, nothing will ever be the same again. I used to think the silence after a celebration meant peace, a soft landing after too much light and noise. But in our house, that silence turned sharp. It cut deeper than the music ever did. After the party, I wandered through rooms that still smelled of flowers and champagne, and I felt it the weight of something that had always been there, finally stepping into view. Edward changed. Or maybe he stopped pretending. His voice grew harsher. His patience thinned until it tore. A glass half full on his desk by noon. Another one by the sink before dusk. He made jokes that weren't jokes, comments about loyalty, about daughters forgetting where their names came from. If I answered softly, he'd smile the way a teacher smiles at a child who doesn't get the lesson. Then he'd repeat himself louder so everyone could hear. At the office, the air shifted. Doors that used to be open stayed shut. Meetings felt tense before they even began. People watched us carefully, measuring our words against his. When Julia questioned him on a budget or a timeline, he cut her off with a laugh that wasn't warm. He called her dramatic, ungrateful, reckless with what he built. And he said it in front of managers, in front of partners. He wanted witnesses. Witnesses made his story easier to control. I learned to tidy my face the way I used to tidy conference tables. Smooth the cloth, line up the pens, tuck the hurt behind a polite nod. It's a skill, but also a trap. The quieter you survive, the more people believe there's nothing to survive. Sophie kept her distance, fewer calls, fewer visits. And when she did appear, she stood between us like someone still convinced the ground was solid. She spoke carefully like we were the ones shaking the floor. She told me he was only trying to plan for the future, that we shouldn't embarrass him after such a generous gesture. I wanted to tell her that generosity with a leash is not generosity. That love doesn't come with hidden clauses. Instead, I said I was tired, which was true. Tired is a safe word. It says everything and nothing. At night, the house turned into a museum. Hallway lights dimmed, picture frames seemed to glare. There's one photo at the beach, 3 girls in crooked sun hats, his shadow stretching across the sand toward us. I would stand in front of it, trying to block that shadow. I never could. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it was thin as ice. Underneath there were sounds, the click of a door, the drag of a step, a breath that wasn't mine. Memory doesn't start with words. It starts with temperature, with weight, with a shape leaning too close. I told myself I imagined it, that a stressed mind invents stories, but my body remembered before I did. I stayed busy. Early emails, late spreadsheets, tasks that could have waited but felt safer than the dark. Work is another kind of silence, one people reward. They call it dedication. They don't see what you're holding back with both hands. Julia burned hotter. She named things. She refused to sit in his office. She told him he couldn't treat us this way, couldn't rewrite promises, couldn't twist love into laws only he could read. He laughed a sharp, cruel sound. He told her she was theatrical. He told her a family is not a democracy. A father is a father until the end. One afternoon in the conference room, he raised his voice. He said I was weak. He said Julia was insolent. He said a tree survives storms by keeping a single trunk, not by asking every branch for permission. People stared at their notebooks. Someone coughed. I ended the meeting early because sometimes the only power you have is to end the scene. That night, Sophie called. Her voice was careful, almost official. She asked me to be patient. She said legacy is complicated, that he must be afraid of letting go, that we should support him so he can support us. I listened. I said I understood. I didn't tell her that fear is no excuse when fear becomes a weapon. Days stacked up like files no one wanted to touch. In the elevator, he spoke to me without looking at me. In the lobby, he introduced me and forgot my title. Warm words saved for strangers, cold ones saved for us. I thought of my mother, how rooms were softer when she was alive, how there was always another chair at the table. Without her, his voice filled every corner. Without her, the walls leaned toward him. I wish I had confronted him. I wish I told him that public humiliation is still violence no matter how he dressed it. But I didn't. I chose the smaller path, fewer explosions. I told myself I was protecting Julia by staying calm, protecting Sophie by not forcing her to choose the truth. I was protecting the version of my father I still wanted to believe in, the one who might soften, the one who might one day say I'm sorry. The apologies never came. Instead came the tests. Urgent memos that rewrote our decisions. Last-minute orders disguised as lessons. His smile in the hallway, daring me to object. If I stayed silent, he grew taller. If I spoke, he played the wounded man. Either way, he won. Julia stopped pretending. She met him head on. Words clashed like breaking glass. Doors left open so everyone could hear. He accused. She answered. He threatened. She laughed. And me, I stood in the middle, a hinge holding the frame. Sophie messaged after one of those fights. She said she loved us both. She said we were making it impossible to help. She said the harder we pushed, the less he'd listen. I typed and erased replies, until finally I wrote, "Love cannot be measured by silence." I don't know if she ever read it. Late at night, the museum returned. I walked past the beach photo and tried to remember my mother's voice, the way she hummed while cooking, the way her hand pressed warm against my cheek when I pretended to sleep. Memory is mercy, but also cruelty. It offers outlines and withholds the rest. One evening, I found Julia on the back steps staring into the dark. She said he will not stop, and if we keep pretending, we'll break where no one can see. I told her I was working on it. She asked what that meant. I had no answer that didn't sound like fear. The tension didn't lift. It settled. It lived with us. It knew when to press and when to wait. At the office, people smiled at me like I was carrying too many plates. At home, even the refrigerator hummed like a warning. Outside, clouds passed without rain. Inside, the storm kept growing. I hoped a small gesture might save us. A hand on his arm, a softer word, a memory offered like a bridge. But bridges need two sides to step forward. He never moved. He held his ground the way a cliff holds its edge, by letting everything else erode. This was the shape of our days. A father whose voice filled every room. A sister who fought like sparks in dry grass. A younger sister clinging to her safe story. And me, balancing between peace and truth, knowing that after the party, something old had woken inside the walls. People think storms announce themselves with thunder. Ours arrived with silence, with the sound of glasses set down too hard, with the careful way we spoke as if words themselves could set fire to the house. And deep inside, I knew it couldn't last. Storms don't drift away because you refuse to see them. They wait. They gather. And in that waiting, memory returned, not as imagination, not as fear, but as fact. And once a fact arrives, it never leaves. I used to think pain was simple. A bruise, a cut, a raised voice you could record and replay as evidence. But the kind of pain my father gave us, it was quieter, slower. It seeped into the cracks of memory until you couldn't tell if it was real or imagined. That night, Julia tore the veil. We were alone in the office. The city lights outside flickered against the glass. Papers lay scattered across the table, but the real weight in the room wasn't on the desk. It was in Julia's eyes. She didn't ease me in. She didn't give me time to breathe. She just said it. He touched me, Claire. Not once, not in passing. He touched me like no father should. Her words hit me like glass shattering inside my chest. I shook my head. I told her she was angry, that she was dramatizing, that she wanted to punish him for humiliating her. But she didn't flinch. Her voice only steadied. You know I'm not lying. You know because you felt it too. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the denial caught in my throat. Because pieces of memory, sharp unfinished, started to push through. The door creaking open when the house was already asleep. The smell of whiskey on his breath. A hand on my back that lingered too long. His voice in the dark saying words that sounded like comfort, but felt like chains. My body remembered before my mind would. The shiver, the nausea, the way I froze when footsteps echoed down the hall. I wanted to say none of it happened. I wanted to scream that she was inventing monsters. But in the silence after her words, my own pulse betrayed me. Fast, erratic, like a trapped animal. Julia leaned closer. Her eyes burned with fury, but also something else, desperation. Do you know what it was like, Claire? To be a child and realize the one person who should protect you was the one stealing your safety. Do you know how it feels to hide in a closet, praying the floorboards don't creak, because if he finds you, it won't be words this time. Her voice broke then, but she kept going. I thought I was alone, because you never said anything, because you smiled, because you told Sophie he was just strict, just old-fashioned. Do you understand? Your silence left me there, alone, with him. Her words sliced through me, because she was right. My silence wasn't neutral, it was complicity. I pressed my hands to my face. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to cut my body out of the story. But the story lived inside me. I remembered nights when I pretended to sleep, heart pounding as the door opened. The weight of him sitting on the edge of my bed. His hand brushing hair from my face, lingering in ways no child should endure. The whispered sentences, half praise, half warning. Good girls don't tell. Family is about loyalty. You're special to me. Those words poisoned me because I wanted love. I wanted safety. And he used those wants against me. So I learned silence. I told myself it was survival. I told myself forgetting was power. But silence doesn't erase. It buries. And what you bury always claws its way back. Julia's face blurred through my tears. She said, "You always told Sophie to forgive him, to be patient, to see the good. Do you realize what that did?" It made her trust him even more. It made her think I was the liar. That's what your silence bought her, loyalty to the man who broke us. I felt sick, because she was right again. I whispered that I didn't remember everything, that my memories came like broken glass, sharp but scattered. She grabbed my hand. Her grip was iron. Memory doesn't have to be whole to be true. Your body knows. Your fear knows. Don't let him steal even that from you. Her words cracked me open, because deep down I had always known. Why else did I flinch at his laughter? Why else did I dread family dinners? Why else did I press myself against the wall when he walked past like I could make myself invisible? It wasn't imagination. It was survival. That night when I finally left the city, lights looked different, colder, sharper. I walked the streets and felt years of silence crushing my chest. Every time I smiled to keep the peace. Every time I told Sophie he was just stressed. Every time I buried my own fear. It had all been for him, not for us. At home I stood in front of that beach photo, 3 girls in crooked sun hats, his shadow stretched over us like a brand. I pressed my forehead to the glass and whispered, "I'm sorry. Sorry to Julia for leaving her alone. Sorry to Sophie for feeding her lies. Sorry to the child I once was who needed me to protect her. But instead, I helped bury her voice." Sleep never came. Instead came the sounds, a door opening in memory, a step dragging closer, a breath too heavy in the dark. I realized then that silence had never saved us. It had only saved him. And Julia was right. Once truth rises, it never sleeps again. There are secrets you believe will be buried forever. Secrets you keep pressing down until they stop making sound. But one day, without warning, they surface. They rise like a dark line at the edge of the sky. And when they reach you, they do not just haunt you. They take the house apart wall by careful wall until you are standing in the open with nothing to hide behind. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am the eldest daughter of Edward Whitmore, the man our town once called a visionary. To the world, he was a success story. The founder who turned a single storefront into a company that shone across the city. People praised his discipline, his charm, that relentless drive that made other men step aside. But at home, it felt different. He carried the same force into every room. And what the world admired was heavier, closer, louder, beneath our roof. Sometimes I think my mother softened him, or tried to. She died when we were still too young to understand the border between before and after. Since then, her absence has been the quietest thing in our house. A missing chair at the table. A perfume I cannot quite remember. Without her, his voice became the only law, and we learned to live beneath it. I was always the quiet one, the one who smoothed the edges, kept the peace, found the middle ground even when there was none. Julia, my sister, she was the strike of a match, quick, bright, unafraid to burn. And Sophie, the youngest, she moved through rooms as if the light belonged to her. Brilliant, a lawyer, beautiful, confident, our father's favorite story to tell. People looked at us and saw a perfect picture. The neat lawn, the calm windows, the logo high over the freeway. They did not see the hairline cracks threading the frame. Truth hides where the eye wants to rest. I remember the night the picture began to come loose. It was my father's 70th birthday, and everything gleamed. The ballroom wore gold balloons, ribboned the spill of light across polished floors. Champagne glasses caught the chandeliers and threw stars across the tables. Music drifted from a hired quartet in the corner, sweet and forgettable, the way money likes its music. He arrived to applause. Cameras flickered. His suit was perfect. His smile practiced. His hand lifted in that brisk wave he had taught himself in the mirror. I stood with my sisters at my side. Julia leaned in with a whisper that might have made me laugh on any other night, though my stomach was already tight. Sophie stood tall, shoulders back, glowing with that easy confidence that made people turn their heads. We were three women bound by blood and by silence, circling the same sun. Then the moment came. My father took the microphone. His voice filled the room, steady, commanding, familiar as a door closing. He spoke of legacy, of family, of building something that lasts. People nodded. They raised their glasses as if each word were a small blessing. He smiled, and with a gentle sweep of his hand, he made his announcement. He said he would divide the company among his three daughters. Each of us would receive a share. The sound of applause rolled up into the chandeliers and broke like thunder. Faces turned toward us with approval, with envy, with the easy warmth people reserve for stories that end well. But then, just as quickly, his tone shifted. He said he would keep one thing: the right to overrule, the right to decide, the right to make the final call. The clapping did not stop. Not at first. Only the air around my ribs tightened. Because I knew. He had never let go of anything in his life. Not control, not power, not us. Julia's jaw set. She did not speak. And then out of the quiet, Sophie did. Her voice was level sharper than I had ever heard it. She asked about documents, about clarity, about how you can hand something over while still holding it with both hands. She was not disrespectful. She was precise, a lawyer asking for terms. The room paused. Even the music hesitated, as if listening. My father stared at her. The smile held, but it froze. His eyes narrowed, the way a door narrows when it begins to shut. And then he said it, a single sentence that sliced the air cleanly in two. "If you cannot trust me, then you will have nothing." Silence. Then a nervous laugh from somewhere near the bar. A glass lifted too high. The quartet reached for the song again, as though the evening had not slipped. People wanted the story to continue. The cameras wanted another smile. I stood there, my ears ringing, watching color drain from Sophie's face as she turned away. That was when I felt it. The hairline crack becoming a fracture, the beginning of something none of us could stop. My father raised his glass again for the lights. He was glowing for them, basking in the applause he had taught himself to harvest. And I thought, this is not generosity. This is a test, and the punishment for failing is exile. After that, the night went soft around the edges. People danced, they laughed, they clinked glass to glass and said the kind of phrases parties are built from. I answered when spoken to. I smiled when cameras looked for me. And all the while, there was a sound inside me that did not belong to music. It was the sound of something giving way. I walked the edge of the room and felt the floor tilt just a little. The flowers were too sweet, the air too bright. I kept thinking of my mother, how rooms were gentler when she was alive, how there had always been an extra chair, how the voice that ruled the house was not the only voice. Without her, everything echoed. Without her, there was nowhere for sound to land. Sophie did not come back to our side. She stood near the stage, straight and silent, as if she were learning a new language in real time. Julia's hands were fists she hid inside a clutch. I wanted to reach for both of them. I did not. Peace had been my talent for so long that I mistook it for love. Later, when the lights dimmed and the band packed their cases, I found a quiet corner. A framed photograph of my father breaking ground on some early building hung there. He was young in it, eyes bright, jaw set, the shovel poised. People say time hardens a man. I think power does. It teaches you which part of the story to say out loud and which part to keep under your hand. On the drive home, the city looked polished, indifferent. Streetlights slid across the windshield like measured breaths. I kept seeing the moment his smile froze. I kept hearing the sentence that followed. If you cannot trust me, then you will have nothing. At the house, I stood in the hall where the family pictures live. Glass shone softly. There we were. At the beach, 3 girls in crooked sun hats, my father's shadow falling long over the sand. For years, I had told myself that shadow meant shelter. That night, I understood what shadows really are. They mark where light cannot reach. I pressed my fingers to the frame until they warmed the glass. Somewhere deep in the house, a pipe knocked a small hollow sound, and the stillness gathered like fog. That was when I knew, as clearly as I have ever known anything, a storm had already started. Not the kind you watch from behind a window, safe with a blanket and a cup in your hands. The other kind, the one that tears the roof away and leaves you in the open, stripped to weather and bone. I went to bed and lay very still, listening to the house breathe. I told myself we would be fine. I told myself he did not mean it. I told myself it was just a sentence in a room full of music. The lies were soft. They covered me like a thin blanket. I did not sleep. Before dawn, the light in the window turned the color of watered milk. I sat up and felt the night slide off my shoulders. I could still taste the party sugar citrus, the faint metallic tang of fear. I could still hear the applause as if the sound had sunk into my skin. And somewhere under that, like a note struck once and left to ring, was the certainty I had been avoiding. Nothing would ever be the same again. I used to believe that pain came in waves, that you could feel it crash, endure the pull, and then stand again when the water drew back. But I was wrong. Sometimes pain does not move at all. It stays. It settles over your life like ash after a fire, coating everything you touch. Julia was the first sign, my sister, my firebrand, the one who never bowed her head even when it would have been easier. I began to notice how tired she looked, how her laughter broke off too quickly, how her hands trembled when she thought no one could see. She hid it, of course. Julia always believed she could carry her battles alone. But illness has a way of making itself known, no matter how fiercely you deny it. When the diagnosis came, it landed like a verdict. She tried to make light of it. She even joked about the unfairness of it all. But her body betrayed her. Hospital corridors became her second home. The strong sister I had leaned on so many times began to fade in front of me, thinner, quieter, shadows where her fire once blazed. And still she smiled at me. She said it would be fine. She said we could handle this. But even as Julia fought her private war, the company, my father's empire, began to crack in public. A worker's death at one of the sites, accusations of negligence, reporters clawing for blood, and then whispers of financial fraud, money funneled through hidden accounts, one headline after another, each sharper than the last, until our family name was no longer polished gold, but stained ink across the front pages. I cannot describe what it feels like to see your life reduced to a scandal, to walk into a grocery store and watch strangers glance at you, whispering, to turn on the television and hear your father's name followed by words like corruption, cover-up, betrayal, to open the paper and see your sister's illness mentioned as if it were just another detail in a story of decline. At home, my father raged. He did not see his own hand in it. He never did. He blamed the lawyers, the managers, the board, the press, and then he turned his fury on me. Claire, he would say, you are weak. Claire, you are ungrateful. Claire, you have failed this family. He hurled the words like stones, each one finding the softest part of me. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell him that I was trying, that I was holding Julia's hand in hospital rooms, that I was cleaning up Sophie's anger, that I was still standing when everything around us leaned toward collapse. But the words never came out, because deep down, I knew the truth. He did not want explanations. He wanted obedience, and I had already failed that test. The board meetings became battlegrounds. Reporters waited outside the building, their cameras ready to catch every grim face. Inside voices rose, accusations, denials, desperate attempts to shift blame. I sat at the long polished table and felt the weight of my father's stare drilling into me, as if my silence were the reason the walls were falling. Then came the day he humiliated me in front of them all. We were in the middle of a heated meeting. The company's stock was plummeting, investors fleeing. I tried to speak. I tried to suggest caution, transparency, something to steady the chaos. And he cut me off. He laughed, a hard, bitter laugh that rang across the table. He called me naive. He said I was nothing more than a frightened child pretending to understand the world of men. His voice grew louder, sharper, until it no longer sounded like a father correcting a daughter, but a king destroying a subject. The room was silent. Every face turned toward me, some pitying, some relieved it was not them. My cheeks burned, my chest tightened. I wanted to stand, to walk out, to throw every word back at him. But I sat still, because in that moment, I was once again a little girl in his house, learning that defiance brought punishment and silence was survival. That night I drove to the hospital to see Julia. She was pale, her skin waxen beneath the harsh lights. I held her hand, and she squeezed mine weakly. I wanted to tell her everything, the headlines, the shouting, the way he had torn me apart in front of them. But I could not. She was already carrying so much. So I smiled instead. I told her I was fine. I told her I was strong. Lies again. Thin, fragile lies. Sophie, meanwhile, had chosen her side. She stood close to our father, defending him in interviews, calling the scandals exaggerations, dismissing the lawsuits as attacks. She looked at me with cold eyes, accusing me of betrayal, of weakness, of siding with the enemy. She called me a traitor, and though I tried to remind her of the years we had spent as sisters, she would not listen. My words broke against her armor, so I carried it alone. The weight of Julia's illness, the collapse of the company, the scorn of my father, the rejection of my youngest sister. I moved through days like a shadow, speaking when I had to, pretending when I must, holding the pieces of myself together with hands that were growing too tired to keep steady. And yet, through all of it, one thought pressed louder than the rest. If the walls had already fallen this far, How much further could they collapse? How much more could we lose before there was nothing left at all? I lay awake night after night with that question echoing in my mind, and no matter how many times I tried to push it down, no matter how many times I whispered that it could not get worse, I knew it always gets worse. I did not expect the truth to arrive in a brown envelope. No grand confession, no dramatic speech, just a thin packet slid under my office door. No return address, no note, as if the past itself had chosen to crawl back in on paper. Inside were copies, old, creased, a scan of a handwritten journal, my mother's small, careful script, dates from years I have tried not to count. There were also emails from a former site manager, a man I barely remembered who wrote as if he had carried a weight for too long. He said he had seen shouting behind closed doors. He said he had seen bruises disguised as clumsiness. He said a girl once came into the office after hours and sat in silence, hands shaking until a driver was called to take her home. I read the pages all the way through and then all the way through again. My body went cold first. Then my hands shook. Then the room tilted. My mother's words were quiet. They always were. "He comes in late," she wrote. "He is angry about the schedule, about the board, about me. He drinks. The girls do not sleep." She never wrote the worst thing outright. She circled it like a wound you cannot touch. She used phrases like "the door again," and "I could not stop him," and "the girls must not know." But the shape of the sentences told the truth anyway. The spaces between them burned. I sat very still and listened to the building hum around me. It felt like standing in a church after the prayer has ended, air thick with words that cannot be taken back. Then I picked up the envelope and walked to Sophie's office. She was on the phone, voice smooth, defending our father to a reporter. She said the lawsuits were exaggerated, the accusations vindictive. She said integrity. She said legacy. She said our family values had not changed. I waited until she set the phone down. I placed the packet on her desk. She frowned. She hates surprises. "What is it?" she asked. "Evidence," I said. "Against who?" she said, already angry. "Against him," I said, and my voice did not break. She opened the envelope like someone opening a letter they already regret. The journal pages came first. She skimmed, then slowed. Her brow furrowed, smooth furrowed again. Her mouth parted not for a word for air. When she reached the line, "The girls must not know," she looked up at me as if I had written it myself. Then she turned to the emails. She read the first one twice. She pressed her thumb to the screen cap as if the pressure could erase it. She whispered "no," then louder "no," and then she said it again and again until the word was only sound. I told her I did not send these. I told her I did not know who did. I told her I had not asked for any of it, but here it was. The past notarized. She pushed back from the desk so hard the chair struck the wall. "He would never," she said. "He did," I said. "You do not know that," she said. "I do," I said, and I hated that I was right. Silence stretched, the kind that rearranges a room, the kind that leaves you different when it ends. Sophie reached for the journal again, for my mother's careful lines. She traced the date on a page without reading the rest. Then she reached for me, not to fight, not to accuse. She put her hand on my arm the way a child reaches for a railing in a moving train. "Tell me it is a lie," she said. I could not, because while she read, my own memories had risen in me like old films spooling to life. The door, the hallway, the wait in the dark. My mother's face in the morning, composed, controlled the way you hold a vase that has already cracked. Sophie's eyes filled and then spilled. She wiped the tears away quickly, irritated that they existed. She asked why we had not told her. She asked why I had let her stand in front of cameras and call truth a slander. She asked where she was when we were breaking. I did not give her excuses. I said I was afraid. I said I carried silence like a shield until it turned into a cage. I said I was sorry for all of it and knew the word could not touch the hurt. She picked up the journal again and flipped to the last page. There was a sentence my mother must have written in a rush, the ink a little heavier, the line unsteady. I will keep the girls safe, it said, and then smaller, as if she wanted to hide even from herself if I cannot. They will keep each other. We both stared at that line. It felt like a key that had come too late. I thought the relief would be clean when the truth finally stood up. It was not. It was jagged. It cut on both sides. I felt the lightness, yes, because at last the story was no longer only inside our bodies. But with the lightness came grief so large I could not hold it. We had lost years. We had lost each other. And the admission did not return a single day. By afternoon, the envelope was elsewhere. Someone sent it to the board, someone sent it to the press. I do not know who. It moved as if it had a will of its own. A statement leaked anonymous but precise, citing a journal corroborating emails dates that matched travel logs and company calendars. The story changed shape in a single news cycle. Not rumor, not resentment. Evidence. At home, he raged. Of course he did. He called it forgery. He called it a conspiracy. He said our mother had been fragile, unwell, prone to dramatics. He said the manager was a disgruntled ex-employee seeking attention. He said I had orchestrated it. He said Julia had poisoned me. He said Sophie had betrayed him by listening. Sophie stood in the doorway and let him finish. Then she held up a copy of our mother's page. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. She asked him one question. Did you do this? He did not answer. He did not have to. The silence was an answer. The way his eyes slid away was an answer. The way his mouth tore into someone else's name instead of hers was an answer. Something broke in Sophie. I could see it happen. Not a loud break. A quiet one. The collapse of a cathedral inside a person where worship used to live. She sat down as if her legs had decided the ground was the only safe place. She did not cry then. She stared at the air between us and breathed like someone learning how. When she finally looked at me, I saw both of us as children for a moment. Two girls standing at the edge of a shadow trying to decide whether to run or pretend it is shade. She whispered, I am sorry for not believing, for the things I said, for the armor I wore in front of you. I told her she did what she needed to survive. I told her we all did. It did not make it easier. It made it true. That night alone, I sat with the journal in my lap. I read the same page until the ink blurred. I felt two currents running through me at once. Relief, because the lie had finally been named. Pain, because naming it did not undo it. And because the truth had come late enough to cost us almost everything. I thought of Julia in the hospital bed. The strength leached from her, but not her courage. I thought of Sophie stripped of the story she had used as a shield. I thought of my mother writing in a quiet room, hoping a future self might be braver than the present one. I whispered into the dark that I would try to be that future. I whispered that I would keep us safe as far as any of us could be safe now. I whispered that I forgave my younger self for mistaking silence for love. Outside, the city went on traffic sirens, the bright, indifferent pulse of other people's lives. Inside, the past had stepped into the light and refused to leave. I felt lighter and heavier at once. I felt human again and ruined. The truth had been spoken. The truth had been heard. And still there was no victory in it. Only the clean, almost holy ache of finally standing where the air is clear looking back at all the years we breathed smoke. I used to think the end would come like a door slamming, loud, final, clean. It didn't. It came in pieces, quiet and relentless. The way a shoreline erodes while no one is watching. By the time you notice, the land is already gone. After the envelope, after the pages and the emails and the silence that said more than any confession, my father began to shrink. Not in height and reach. His voice no longer filled rooms. His anger no longer bent people into shape. He wandered the house at odd hours, muttering to no one. He forgot names, then faces, then the thread that used to pull him through a sentence. Sometimes he called me by my mother's name and then looked startled, as if he had seen a ghost wearing my skin. People said it was stress. They said it was age. I knew better. It was the bill coming due. Power leaves a body the way heat leaves a dying fire, slowly at first, then all at once. I wish I could say he softened, that the edge dulled, but the last thing to leave him was the cruelty. Even as his mind frayed, he could still find the words that cut. He called me disloyal. He called Julia ungrateful, even from a bed he would never visit. He called Sophie naive and begged her to stay his good girl. And when none of us could be what he demanded, he turned his face to the wall and let the room grow smaller. While he unraveled Julia's body, fought the way it always had fiercely, as if courage alone could bully cells into obedience. There were days she seemed brighter, the pulse of her voice returning, and I let hope into the room like a stray cat. Then the numbers would turn against us. The doctors would lower their eyes. The light would thin again. I learned the language of machines. I learned the choreography of hospital rooms, plastic chairs at odd angles, blankets that never held warmth, the hum you hear even after you leave. I held her hand and told her stories from when we were girls. The beach, the hats, the crooked smiles. She would laugh, then cough, then squeeze my fingers and whisper that she was not afraid. I wanted to be brave with her. Sometimes I was. Sometimes I wasn't. On her last morning, the sky was the pale gray of paper not yet written on. She asked me to open the blinds and let the light touch her face. She asked if I remembered the old promise that we would keep each other safe. I told her I did. I told her I was sorry for every year I mistook silence for love. She shook her head, then smiled the smallest smile, and said we did what we had to do to keep breathing. When she was gone, the room did not change. Not at first. The machine still hummed. The hallway still buzzed. A nurse still entered with the careful footsteps of someone trained to move through grief. But the air had shifted. A shape had left it. The world without asking permission was suddenly less. I carried her name around the rest of the day like a full glass I could not spill. Every noise was too loud, every kindness too sharp. I drove without remembering the streets. I found myself parked in front of the house and could not go inside. The door looked like a mouth that might swallow me. When I finally stepped over the threshold, my father was in his chair by the window. He did not ask where I had been. He did not notice my eyes. He was watching a point in the air only he could see. I said her name. He blinked, then nodded once, a gesture so small it barely belonged to a human. For a moment I hated him with a heat that frightened me. Then it passed, leaving only ash. Sophie came later. She had been at the hospital and missed me by an hour. Her face was washed out, the careful armor gone. She wanted to be held and did not know how to ask. I reached for her and she flinched, not away from me, away from the person she had been. I told her none of this was her fault. I meant it. She told me she wished she had believed earlier. I told her earlier is a word that always arrives too late. We stood in the hall where the photographs live, 3 girls in sun hats, the long shadow on the sand. She raised her hand as if to touch the glass and then let it fall. I heard all the sentences she did not say. I felt all the ones I could not speak without breaking. Between us there was love. Between us there was wreckage. And sometimes the wreckage makes the love look smaller than it is. Days blurred. The company sank to its knees. Lawyers traded letters like weapons. Reporters called and called. I stopped answering. The house grew quieter, and yet I could not find silence anywhere inside it. My father slipped further. He no longer knew which room was his. He asked for his mother at dusk. He asked for the shovel from the groundbreaking photo. He asked if the men were coming for the poor, as if time had folded, and he could step back into it if only someone would hand him a hard hat. One evening, the nurse found him on the floor, his breath thin and stubborn. He lasted the night and half of the next day. I sat beside the bed and watched the rise and fall that had ordered my life. When it stopped, the clock on the wall did not pause in respect. I listened for sorrow. What came was stranger. It was an emptying, as if a long storm had finally moved past the house and left the rooms bare and ringing. People asked me how I felt. I told them I was fine. I told them I was relieved. I told them I was devastated. All of it was true in parts and false in whole. Grief is not a single thing. It is a handful of sand that will not stay in one shape. We buried him without speeches. The wind made more noise than the mourners. Sophie stood with her hands clasped, eyes fixed on something beyond the trees. When it was done, she asked if I would come over for coffee. I said I would. We sat at her kitchen table and talked around the edges of what mattered. She apologized again, then stopped and apologized for apologizing. I tried to reach across years with one conversation and discovered that the distance between two chairs can be wider than an ocean. Later alone, I walked the house like a museum guard after closing. The rooms were both smaller and larger. His absence stretched them and swallowed them at the same time. In the hallway, the photograph found me as it always does. I stood before it and counted the ways we had been changed by a shadow. I did not cry. Tears felt like a language for another time. I do not know if families truly break, or if they simply loosen until they are no longer something you can hold. What I know is this: the center that once claimed us is gone. The story that held us even in harm has ended. Julia is beyond pain. Sophie is beside me and also far away. My father is a name on a stone, and I am here counting breaths, learning how to live in a house that no longer tells me who I am. Sometimes I sit in the yard at dusk and wait for the first star. I listen to the neighbor's dog bark. I smell the faint iron of sprinklers on hot grass. Ordinary things, small and good. I think of my mother's handwriting, that line she wrote when no one was listening. If I cannot keep them safe, they will keep each other. We did not keep each other the way she hoped. Not always. Not enough. But I am trying now in the quiet that follows the storm to hold what can be held. A memory that does not bruise when I touch it. A morning that does not carry the weight of yesterday. A version of love that does not require me to disappear. The family is gone as it was. That is true. What remains is what I will build with what is left, brick by careful brick, without shadows, with light that reaches even the corners. I will never forget the silence that came after the storm. For so long, my life had been filled with shouting accusations breaking glass, the echo of my father's voice tearing through walls. And then one day, there was only quiet. Edward was no longer the man who once towered over us. His rage burned itself out, leaving behind only the ruins of his body and mind. I watched him stumble through hallways, his sharpness gone, his memory fraying like old cloth. Sometimes he would call my name and forget why. Other times he would mistake me for someone else entirely. It should have felt like justice. But all I saw was the collapse of a man who had built himself into a tyrant, and now had nothing left but shadows. And yet even as my father faded, Julia slipped further away. Her illness tightened its grip until no strength of will could push it back. The sister who once burned brighter than all of us now lay quiet in a hospital bed, her breaths shallow, her fire dimmed. I held her hand every chance I could. Sometimes she would squeeze back, sometimes she was too tired. I whispered stories to her, memories of childhood summers of laughter we once believed would never end. She smiled faintly as if she could still see those days. And then, one morning, she was gone. I thought I was prepared. I told myself I had braced for it, that I knew this moment would come. But when the machines fell silent, it was as if a piece of me had been torn out with her. Julia's absence was not just the loss of a sister. It was the loss of the one person who had carried my pain when I could not. She had been my mirror, my protector, my proof that survival was possible. And now she was only memory. Sophie wept too, though her tears carried something different. Regret. She had stood by our father, defended him, believed his lies until the truth forced itself into the open. By the time she understood, it was too late. Julia never heard her apology. And I could not bridge the gulf between us. Her sorrow was real, but so was the distance. She had chosen her side for too long, and the wound between us had grown too deep to heal. So there I was standing, at the center of ruins, my father's empire crumbling, my father himself a hollow shell, Julia buried beneath cold earth, Sophie reaching out with hands that could no longer grasp what had been lost, and me, still breathing, still watching, still trying to understand how a family could shatter so completely. I used to believe families broke suddenly in one single violent moment, but I was wrong. They break slowly, piece by piece, until one day you look around and realize there is nothing left but fragments. That was the day I understood the Hale family no longer existed. Not as it once had, not as it was meant to be. It had died with Julia, with my father's mind, with every secret we carried too long, and all that remained was me, the witness, the survivor, the one left to tell the story.